Service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the representative of the Polisario Front in Switzerland and for the United Nations and International Organization in Geneva, Obi Bushraya Bashir, said that the June 17, 1970 Zmela Intifada or uprising has been the beginning of a national Sahrawi awareness. Several civilians were killed and others injured at midnight in Israeli airstrikes targeting the Nusayrat refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip. And as you followed in our top stories, Israeli colonists today attacked lands belonging to Palestinian residents in the village of Yasuf east of Selfit. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. The advisor to the President of the Republic in charge of the General Directorate of Communication, Kamal Sidi Said, paid this morning a courtesy visit to several public and private media where he presented the congratulations of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, on the occasion of Eid al-Adha festival to those working in the communication sector. Sidi Said went in person to the headquarters of the Public Radio and Television, where he met with the Director General of the Algerian Radio, Mohamed Baghali, and the permanent staff of both institutions to congratulate them on the occasion of Al-Eid, and has visited the editing rooms of the various radio stations, as well as the studios and various departments to meet the journalists and technicians in their workplaces, wishing them success in the exercise of their tasks in the fulfillment of the noble mission of the media. The advisor to the President of the Republic then went to the headquarters of the Public Television Corporation before continuing his visit to other public and private media. The war veteran and former journalist Mohamed Laid Bourada died following a long illness. One of the pioneers of the press in Algeria, the deceased held the positions of the General Directorate or Director of the Daily El Mujahid and Director of Channel 3 of Algerian Radio. In this painful ordeal, the Minister of War Veterans or War Veterans, Laid Bourada, extended his sincere condolences to the family of the deceased and his fellow fighters, assuring them of his deep compassion and praying to Allah the Almighty to surround the deceased of his saint mercy, to welcome him into his vast paradise and to offer his family and loved ones patience and comfort. The high are now to the, as you followed in our top stories, the representative of the Polisario Front in Switzerland and for the United Nations and the International Organization in Geneva, Obi Bushraya Bashir, has pointed out that the June 17, 1970 Zmela Intifada or uprising that has been led by Mohammed Sid Ibrahim Basiri has been the beginnings of a national Sahrawi awareness by forming the collective Sahrawi feeling and crystallizing it into a national political affiliation with clear liberation and independence objectives. In a brief article on historic Zmela uprising, the diplomat wrote that the 1,000-mile march that the Polisario Front took over recent decades to impose the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination and independence would not have happened had it not been for the first big step taken by the 1968-1970 Sahrawi liberation movement in forming awareness, organizing the masses and storming the square at 0 hour. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk has warned that the situation in the West Bank, including Al-Quds, is deteriorating significantly. Turk added that there is death and suffering that cannot be accepted by conscience in the Gaza Strip, stressing that murderers and bombardments have become daily in Palestine.
Killings and injuries of civilians have become a daily occurrence. Destruction of vital infrastructure a daily occurrence. Devastating and reckless. Children shot at, hospitals bombed, heavy artillery launched on entire communities, all along with hateful, divisive and dehumanizing rhetoric. I'm dismayed by the extent to which warring parties have pushed beyond the boundaries of what is acceptable and legal on many fronts, with utter contempt for the other, trampling human rights at their core. In 2023, data gathered by my office shows the number of civilian deaths in armed conflict soared by 72%.
UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk noted that about 528 Palestinians, including 133 children, had been killed by Israeli occupation forces or colonists since October 7, 2023, stressing that some cases raise serious concerns about unlawful killings. 7 civilians were killed and others injured at midnight in Israeli airstrikes targeting the Nusayrat refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip. Local sources said that Israeli warplanes launched a series of raids on the Nusayrat camp, resulting in the killing of 7 civilians and the wounding of several others. Meanwhile, the occupation warplanes intensively bombed several areas in the central governorate of the Gaza Strip, especially the city of Deir el-Balah and Bureij camp. The occupation artillery also targeted the western neighborhoods of the city of Rafah, south of the Gaza Strip. The number of civilians killed in the Gaza Strip since the start of the occupation's aggression on October 7, 2023 has risen to 37,347. Israeli settlers today attacked lands belonging to Palestinian residents in the village of Yusuf, east of Selfit. Local sources said that a group of Israeli settlers attacked agricultural lands in east of Yusuf and damaged the water well and agricultural chains. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has once again stressed the need for an immediate end to the massacres committed by the Zionist entity in the Gaza Strip over the past 9 months. On the second day of Eid al-Adha, the Turkish president said it was another sad holiday for the Palestinian people who have been subjected to occupation, injustice and systematic genocide for 76 years. He added that the world must take steps to immediately prevent the daily massacres. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. International Day for Countering Hate Speech in order to protect human rights against hate speech and to promote agricultural dialogue and tolerance is celebrated today. The details with Majid Mila.
In his speech on the occasion of the International Day of Countering Hate Speech, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said hate speech is a marker of discrimination, abuse, violence, conflict and even crimes against humanity. He stressed that recent months have seen an upsurge in anti-Muslim hate speech online and in public comments by influential leaders. He stressed that the speech is massively amplified by the power of digital platforms and tools that enable it to spread across borders and cultures. He added that states have an obligation under international law to prevent and combat incitement to hatred and to promote diversity, mutual understanding and solidarity, and that they must step up and implement these commitments while ensuring the measures they take preserve freedom of speech and protect minorities and other communities. Governments, local authorities, religious, corporate and community leaders have a duty to invest in measures to promote tolerance, diversity and inclusivity and to challenge hate speech in all its forms. The message of the United Nations top officials seemed to refer to the statements of the multiple Israeli politicians and military leaders who used inflammatory language when referring to Palestinians in Gaza, something that began well before October 7th. Meanwhile, anti-Palestinian rhetoric grew more prevalent across social media platforms, lately encouraged by the Zionist politicians.
More about the International Day of Countering Hate Speech in a program to be broadcast in a few minutes from now. Stay tuned. The African Union has condemned the recent massacres perpetrated by the Allied Democratic Forces in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which have resulted in the deaths of 150 people since June. Asia Bikar.
The African Union Commission Chief Moussa Faki Mahamat expressed his profound dismay over the escalating violence against civilians in North Kivu province, particularly in the regions of Beni and Lubero. Mahamat expressed dismay of the increase in massacres of innocent civilians by the Allied Democratic Forces in Beni and Lubero and strongly condemned the attacks, which have claimed the lives of 150 people since the beginning of June. Mahamat urged the Congolese authorities to intensify their efforts in collaboration with regional countries to curb the spread of the terrorist threat in the Great Lakes region. He reiterated the African Union's commitment to support the countries of the Great Lakes region in their fight against terrorism. The ADF, originally formed in Uganda, has been operating in eastern DR Congo for decades. Despite joint military operations conducted by the Congolese and Ugandan armies since late 2021 targeting the ADF in North Kivu and the neighboring Ituri province, the violence against civilians have continued unabated. These operations have so far failed to significantly diminish the ADF's capacity for deadly attacks. The DRC has long been plagued by violence from various armed groups, leading to a prolonged humanitarian crisis.
Now, in Mexico, a newly elected mayor was shot dead in the Mexican state of Guerrero. Local authorities indicated that Salvador Villaflores Flores was on a bus when he was shot in the head in the town of San Pedro Las Playas. The beach resort is nearly a 2-hour drive from Copala, where he was elected mayor on June 2nd. The state of Guerrero housed several criminal organizations vying for control of the territory. This year's World Day to combat desertification and drought spotlights and stewardship. This year's theme, United for Land, Our Legacy, Our Future, is a recognition that sustainable land management is critical to providing a healthy and sustainable future for all. On the occasion, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has addressed a message in which he said that the world must dramatically pick up the pace of implementation and ensure young people are heard in the negotiations.
The security, prosperity and health of billions of people rely on thriving lands, supporting lives, livelihoods and ecosystems. But we're vandalizing the earth that sustains us. Every second, around 4 football fields of healthy land are degraded. As the focus of this year's World Day reminds us, we must be united for land. Governments, businesses, academics, communities and more must come together and act. We know what we need to do. It's set out clearly in the United Nations Convention to combat desertification. As we mark the 30th anniversary of the Convention, the world must dramatically pick up the pace of implementation, build momentum towards UNCCD COP16 in Riyadh, and ensure young people are heard in the negotiations. Together, let's sow the seeds for a thriving future for nature and humanity.
As promised, next, a program on the International Day of Countering Hate Speech.
The United Nations General Assembly declared June 18th as the International Day for Countering Hate Speech in order to protect human rights against hate speech and to promote intercultural dialogue and tolerance. Hate speech is defined in the United Nations as any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are, in other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor. Hate speech includes racial hatred, xenophobia, aggressive nationalism, and ethnocentrism against minorities, immigrants, and people of immigrant origin. Includes any form of expression that spreads, incites, encourages, or justifies other forms of hatred based on intolerance, including religious intolerance expressed in the form of discrimination and hostility. Hate speech and hate crimes threaten the principle of equality, which is one of the requirements of democratic social order, generally target vulnerable groups, and increase discrimination and marginalization. Discrimination and hate speech are contrary to international human rights regulations, such as the United Nations International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. For the aim of countering hate speech, this day was celebrated for the first time in 2022. In his 2024 message on the occasion of the International Day of Countering Hate Speech, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said hate speech is a marker of discrimination, abuse, violence, conflict, and even crimes against humanity. He gave the example of the effects of hate speech in Rwanda, Bosnia, and beyond, stressing that there is no acceptable level of hate speech and it should be eradicated. He stressed that recent months have seen an upsurge in anti-Muslim hate speech online and in public comments by influential leaders, adding that it is massively amplified by the power of digital platforms and tools that enable it to spread across borders and cultures. Antonio Guterres pointed out that states have an obligation under international law to prevent and combat incitement to hatred and to promote diversity, mutual understanding and solidarity, and that they must step up and implement these commitments while ensuring that the measures they take preserve freedom of speech and protect minorities and other communities. Governments, local authorities, religious, corporate, and community leaders have a duty to invest in measures to promote tolerance, diversity, and inclusivity, and to challenge hate speech in all its forms. The message of the UN top officials seemed to refer to the statements of the multiple Israeli politicians and military leaders who used inflammatory language when referring to Palestinians in Gaza, something that began well before October 7th. Anti-Palestinian rhetoric grew lately more prevalent across social media platforms, encouraged by the Zionist politicians. The director of the UN Interregional Crime and Justice Research Center, or UNICRI, Antonia Marie De Meo, said this day is an opportunity to say no to hate speech in all its forms.
Hate speech in all its many forms incites violence, sows discord, and threatens peace and stability around the world. This is why the United Nations is leading this campaign to say no to hate. UNICRI is proud to lend its voice to the international chorus, today and every day, to say no to hate. Young generations in particular are exposed to normalization of hate speech through new media channels. UNICRI works with youth, empowering them as change agents. In Mali, for example, we trained young leaders how to respond to extremist narratives. We also promote sport and its values as a way to improve reconciliation, unity, and gender equality, and to spread a culture of peace that opposes hate. Leveraging our research expertise, UNICRI analyzes hate speech and extremist trends as drivers of violence and atrocity crimes. Our report, Stop the Virus of Disinformation, UNICRI has worked for years to enhance the capacity of law enforcement, legal and media professionals, and civil society to respond to hate speech and hate crimes.
Alice Ndirutu, the special advisor of the UN Secretary General on the prevention of genocide, talked about the real-world examples of crimes committed as a result of hate speech and how engaging local communities hold the key to preventing future incidents.
His speech was employed to dehumanize the Rohingya, referring to them as subhuman, referring to them as fleas, referring to them as thorns that needed to be removed. And ultimately, that is precisely what happened. By the time they arrived in Bangladesh, they had gone through decades of torture, decades of displacement, decades of dehumanization. And this hate speech that has been employed is something that we must pay attention to. There's a lot of information on Bosnia-Herzegovina, on what happened in Srebrenica, the hate speech that preceded and accompanied the killing of the men and boys in Srebrenica. There's a lot of information on the Tutsi in Rwanda and the moderate Hutu, and the hate speech that was used to describe the Tutsi, how they were dehumanized. So my message really to everybody is that genocides happen within communities. Genocides happen to you and me. When a genocide unfolds, the people targeted are people who are ordinary, and we must keep paying specific attention to the narratives that we pass on from one generation to the other. They are narratives in which communities share the trauma they experienced, and they pass it on to their children.
She added that hate speech is taught and not innate in humans, thus older generations should stop exporting it to younger ones.
We all know that no child is born with hate, that hate is taught. And we know that the first step of socialization for a child is the family. The child begins to hear about hate from parents, from siblings. They begin to hear about stereotypes, about other ethnic communities, about other racial, religious communities, and they begin to understand that there is something called an other, that there is us and then there is the other. We then move to the school and then we keep being socialized, this time by the media, by religious organizations, by political issues that we see happening. At this point, the child is now probably getting into university and they've begun to internalize hate. They have the stereotypes in place, they have the prejudices in place. Then what that means is that that adult who was a child born without hate becomes the person who continues the next circle of socialization. And ultimately, what happens is that when people begin to fight each other, so what that means is that we must find ways to keep interrupting that circle of socialization through education, through knowledge, through having friends from different ethnic, racial, religious communities. And what I've learned is that the same tools that are used to spread hate often turn out to be the best tools to counter hate speech.
UN coordinator Valerie Joliand, for her part, said the scale and impact of hate speech is nowadays amplified by new technologies and social media, to the point that online hate speech has become one of the most frequent methods for spreading divisive rhetoric and violent ideologies.
Hate speech online can cause harm in real life. Let's say no to hate. Make your social feeds a no-hate zone. Check facts before sharing. Support those targeted by hate speech and challenge hate by sharing messages of tolerance and equality.
That's it, dear listeners, for this program devoted to the International Day of Countering Hate Speech.
Scientists and inventors, including Arabs, Persians and Turks, were probably hundreds of years ahead of their counterparts in the European Middle Ages. The Muslims made innumerable discoveries and wrote countless books about medicine, surgery, physics, chemistry, philosophy, astrology, geometry and various other fields. Today's article discusses the most famous Muslim scientists and inventors and their wonderful inventions. Hassan ibn al-Haytham was a scientific thinker, mathematician, astronomer and physicist. Due to this extensive knowledge, he became famous very quickly, and his studies, findings and suggestions significantly developed the field of astronomy. He was born during the Islamic Golden Age in around 965 CE in Iraq and died in 1040 in Cairo, Egypt. He had an idea to build a dam for the River Nile and was invited to do so by the Caliph of Egypt. However, Ibn al-Haytham realized he would not be able to do it with the technology at that time. To erode the wrath of the Caliph and death, he pretended to be insane, which meant he avoided death but was placed under house arrest for 10 years. During this time, he developed his ideas further. He wrote the book The Model of the Motions of Each of the 7 Planets, a book on astronomy. He wrote 25 volumes on astronomy about his observations and findings, and this greatly developed the field of astronomy starting in the Muslim world. He wrote a book called the Book of Optics, Kitab al-Manzir, and it was translated into Latin, which meant his work and ideas influenced scholars in Europe. He is considered today as the father of modern optics, and his ideas made him an important figure in the history of optics. Ibn al-Haytham built the first camera obscura, which was the beginning of photographic camera. He used the idea of projection to experiment and develop his ideas on light rays and vision. He wrote several pieces, including a discourse on light, on the shape of the eclipse, and on the light of the moon, all of which were important in further developing optics and theories about vision. Ibn al-Haytham's discoveries in optics and vision overturned centuries of misunderstanding. In his experiments, he observed that light coming through a tiny hole traveled in straight lines and projected an image onto the opposite wall. But he realized that light entering the eyes was only the first step in seeing. He built on the work of Greek physician Galen, who had proven a detailed description of the eye and the optic pathways. Today, the oldest known drawing of the nervous system is from Ibn al-Haytham's Book of Optics, in which the eyes and optic nerves are illustrated. When Ibn al-Haytham's Book of Optics was translated into Latin, it had great influence and was widely studied. It was published as a print edition in 1572, so that it could be more easily available. The Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius chose to honor Ibn al-Haytham alongside Galileo in his most famous work on the moon, Selenographia, published in 1647. Ibn al-Haytham suggested that only the light rays that hit the surface of the eye head-on would pass into the eye, creating a representation of the world. It was Kepler in the 16th century who corrected this and proposed that the object of sight, what is seen, comes from both perpendicular and angular rays that hit the eye to form an inverted image on the retina. Among Ibn al-Haytham's other insight was his understanding of the crucial role of visual contrast. For example, he realized the color of an object depends on the color of the surroundings, and that a contrast of brightness levels explains why we can't see the stars during daytime. Ibn al-Haytham also subscribed to a method of empirical analysis to accompany theoretical postulates that is similar in certain ways to the scientific method we know now. He realized that the senses were prone to error, and he devised methods of verification, testing and experimentation to uncover the truth of the natural phenomena he perceived. Up until his time, the study of physical phenomena had been an abstract activity with occasional experiments. After his death, Ibn al-Haytham's writings were more influential in Latin than Arabic. The only significant work in Arabic that builds on Ibn al-Haytham's ideas was produced in the early part of the 14th century in present-day Iran by Kemal el-Din al-Farisi, who was himself a brilliant scientific thinker. The Islamic Golden Age was a time